Anti-Climate Action Network, Tāmaki Makaurau, welcomes you to our October Hui Speaker Spotlight.
Welcome, Johnnie.
Tēnā tātou, reti ka mira microphone. I'll try and keep it simple. But e miu kana kia tātou I te atamei, miu kana ki o tātou karakia, e miu kana ki te whenua nei, ko limu tahi te mauna, ko tunu mau te awa e rere ana ki te waitemata, ki te iwi whainga o te wāhi nei a Ngāti Whātua o Rākei. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou. Kia ora everybody, I just sort of did the Māori GPS thing, or pepeha, and just in terms of our local area here, sort of on the junction of Ponsonby Road and sort of K Road and New North Road, almost where the mobile station and the water tankers, there used to be, that's our highest point on this ridgeline. And so Remu Tahi is the name of that point, and there used to be a single Remu tree before the water tank. So just acknowledging that sort of place. And then from there, and earlier it was mentioned that this area is known for catching eels. So the stream down Newton Gully, where there's the motorway, the northwestern motorway, that's an old stream there. That sort of comes around and it makes its way into Waitemata Harbour, and the name of that is Tunumau. Tuna is the eel, mau is to grab or hold on. So literally the place where we'd go and get some eels, and then just acknowledging our local mana whenua in this area, Ngāti Whātua o Rākei. And so it's a real privilege to be here. I play in a number of spaces, and through my whakapapa I belong to Ngāti Tata Waiho, and obviously with the name Johnnie Freeland, that is a reflection of my Scottish ancestry from Aberdeen. My great-grandfather got on a boat and caught the train from Aberdeen down to Southampton, got on a boat, brought his wife and 5 children in 1915 in the middle of World War I to come to Auckland. And at that time, Auckland City Council had a fishing trawlers they owned. So Auckland City used to fish for Auckland. And so he became a captain of a trawler, and then he was asked, the Navy commandeered him and his the trawler Simplin, and because a German merchant ship called the Wolf, he went around the world and dropped off mines in South America, in Australia and in New Zealand. And prior to him departing Scotland, he was doing minesweeping duty in the North Sea. So he's one of those fellows that had a bit of experience, so he did minesweeping during that time. So, and then from him, my granddad, my dad, they all end up working for, at that time, Auckland City, Auckland Harbour Board. Yep. And then I came into local government as a cadet in 1995. And then during the Super City, I went across from the Auckland Regional Council and was the GM Māori in Auckland Council from 2010 to 2016. So at that point, I was the 4th John Freeland that worked for local government in Auckland. And then recently, my son Tuhaka is now working as a librarian at Māori-led Library. So he's our 5th generation within our family working for local government. So I have it's in my DNA, it's in my whakapapa of being of service to our communities, to our people. My mum ran women's refuges, and they were emergency foster parents growing up. So we would always wake up in our house in Māngere with a new brother or sister. And and I've been working on the street since I was 10, because you just go with your parents and do what, So that's sort of part of my background, but also a bit of a reflection of what drives me, of being of service and serving our communities, our people, the land. And so I've grown up in between worlds, in between cultures, Western cultures and Te Ao Māori cultures, so I've realised that I've been really lucky that my comfort is in the discomfort of the in-between space. As a kid, I was sent out by the old people, hey, can you go and learn this stuff, to come back and translate. So I work in between worlds, and also part of that navigation translation work is also being able to translate stuff that sit in the sky down to the ground and vice versa. And just acknowledging the work that you guys do and within each of your organisations, but also coming together as a network, is that on the ground is where it happens, but we need to be able to come together to navigate other spaces and influence. And so, you know, especially where, and I'll go into a little bit shortly around a Māori worldview or Māori perspective of this thing with climate. And with a thing of Māori systems thinking is holistic, it's all interrelated. And I'll just see a thought around oranga, around wellbeing as a unifying thing, which I'll sort of tell the story of what we've been able to put together. But the first thing we've got is this little video, and hopefully the sound, but it's just sort of, our rangatahi developed this video at the time of the development of Taruhia Tawhiri. All the images are from places in Auckland, so it's Auckland specific. It talks from a youth perspective, Māori perspective of this thing called climate change. So,
I te tīmatanga ko te kore, nā te kore ko te pō, ka puta ki te whaiao ki te ao mā. Ko rangi nui e tui honei, ko papa tuanuku e takoto ake nei. Ko arau a tamariki, he atu, o te ngāhere, o te moana, o te hau, o te uenuku, o te puia, o te whenua, o te aruhi, o te kumara, o te wai Māori, o te tangata, ki hei mauiona.
E aku ira tangata, he tupu koe no te whenua o tō whaia, he puna koe no ngā wai o o tūpu, he māngai koe mo o manātua. Engari, nā tēnei au hau, kua mimiti haere tō tāua honota. Ka kite au i tōku oranga ki roto i a koe. Ka kite hoki koe i tō oranga ki roto i a hau. Kua he katoa tāua, kua he katoa tātau. Kua tai te wā mā tāua anō tāua e whakaora. Ko au, ko koe, ko tāua.
So that just acknowledges our rangatahi voice in the context of our ancestral voices and wisdoms that make up nature. And the last part that it finished with is this thought of ko au, ko koe, ko tau, which basically is I am you and you am I. You know, we're all living together, we're all connected. And from a Māori perspective, and in our belief system, is that all of us are children of Rangi Nui, our Sky Father, and Papa Tuanuku and our Earth Mother. And that's not to displace any other belief systems, it's just that's what's come from this freedom and from this land. And that what's really important is we start to what we already have in common, our giving. And so in that sense, it's thinking about ko taua, taua. You and I and you, it's us together, you know, that we're already connected. And one of the key things is really about whether it's climate, cost of living crisis, poverty, those are all different dysfunctions and manifestations of ill-being and displacement and disconnection from their whole living system. You know? And within our own way, we're trying to do our part within our different contexts. And if you again imagine that each of your groups represent individual canoes or waka on the ocean. So it's not about, which I think was one of the learnings about our response to COVID, and we had that sort of government saying of he waka, kotahi tātou, we're all in this together, which is not quite that, because the issue is getting conformed and pushed into one waka. We always have a debate of who's the captain, who's the steering, and where we go. Whereas actually, the view I have is everyone has their own mana and integrity, their mana and authority to make decisions, and the way that you have formed together, and you've created this network, is you're like a fleet of waka that we're all trying to navigate away. And one thing that I've learned from our ancestors in the way they navigated space is they'd agree on two things. What's our destination, or what's the next point we're navigating to? And then the second part is a rough time of arrival, not a definite date or time that we all have to be there. Because what that does is allows us to undertake each of our journeys and our pathways to travel in the way we need to travel based on who's in our waka, our communities in that, so that at least we know we've got a shared view of where we go, and then we've got a rough time of arrival. Because if you need to go, this way and that way and go meet whānau over there, you've got to allow the time. Not that we've got to have this date that we've all got to land together. So that's one of the things about, and it's a bit that, that question is how do you navigate a herd of cats? I always thought you just put out a bowl of milk and let them find. So again, it's looking to nature, looking to those ways that, because we've got to, and one of the key unifying things is water. Allow to tune into the flow of water. So when we were talking about system change or navigating, for me there's 3 levels. There's systems, there's the system stuff, all that gobbledygook systems, and we've got so many different systems that confuse us, everything. But what does that systems change, shift look like? The second part is we've got to anchor it to place. Whether it's Tāmaki Makaurau in a wider sense, or each of the areas that we sit. So we use water to help guide us and anchor to place. So we're talking about catchments. Because in a catchment setting, we don't have just our community, we have a number of communities. What we have in common is the flow of water. So how do we create space to bring all the different voices together to coalesce, to co-create, to co-navigate? So that's where place-based based on water is a way of finding again what we have in common and then shared space. And then the third level of influence or navigation is at a whānau level, is at family. What are we doing within families to drive that change? And the lessons we've learned is you need at least 3 generations together, because it needs to be a generational focus, and it's over generations, and it don't have to be all related within one family. It's finding connection of the wisdom of our elders with the middle part of us being parents, if you like, and then our youth and our young ones, because they're the ones that are pushing boundaries. And I always have this image of sometimes we're following in the footsteps of our ancestors, but for those that are parents and grandparents, we're actually chasing the footprints of our kids and our mokos, because they're always running ahead. Yeah. So we're looking for those footprints to follow. So thinking about that systems level, place-based and whānau-centred, and one of the how things that are happening at a local level is the Pūnui Regeneration Program, and to acknowledge the Beautification Trust. So again, that's sort of iwi anchored, community-led, supported by all the bureaucracies, not at the heart. And why I mentioned the Beautification Trust and some of them, they have an annual clean-up of the Pūnui. Now what we're able to land with them is that with Friends of the Pūnui of Beautification, we have a lot of our pakeke, our elders, that want to give back to community. But often, where's the next generation with them? So one of our rangatahi focus groups out in the Pūnui, but Ngā Kua Mamara, so they're connecting with those elders to share wisdom, knowledge, by just getting together shoulder to shoulder in those opportunities. So again, when we think about navigating change, we want to think about bringing a generational aspect, because how we honour our term is makaurau, our white-haired people, because that's a reflection of their journey, their wisdom that we want to tap into. And not all of us have the privilege of having grandchildren or they're living somewhere else. So So we need to start adopting the young ones so that that transfer of knowledge and wisdom happens together. Because it's the intergenerational way of working. So, and the other key sort of learning from COVID that we learned, to remember how we want to go into our little bubbles. So again, that was nature telling us and reminding us that, and it may have been one of the first times since the recent ice age where humanity sort of went into lockdown. And yet, some of us were craving for getting back to normal. Some of us were like, oh man, this is such a quiet space that, and when we started to see in nature a little bit of regeneration. You know, fish were coming closer to the shore that we hadn't seen, birds and things, because they started reclaiming their space. As soon as we got back in the cars and that, they shrunk back out. So again, you know, looking to the wisdom of nature. And so the big lesson that I learned about this was this idea of scaling. Often in a human-centered design approach or prototype with the view of going to scale. So that's really about, let's go and test it and make it all the same. What I saw in the beauty of our bubbles was a different view of scaling, and they look like scales on a fish. A small, that were interconnected, and if we, for the fisher people in there, scales not only help protect the fish, but it enables the fish move through water, less resistance. So just wanted to introduce the thought about a different view around scaling. And just like what the network represents is all these little bubbles of activity, action, and focus that are just creating space to interconnect and start to form those scales or different way of thinking about scaling. So in terms of Te Ora or Tāmaki Makaurau, and I'm going to share some what I call the Māori Da Vinci Code here, and just the way we wove things in and where to actually find it. Okay, so to unlock it for you guys. And at this point, I really want to acknowledge Pippa. And just maybe to you, in your time, and especially with Richard Hill. You know, you were the two key drivers at the council, and the table you had to navigate at the Committee for Environment and Climate Change to get this kaupapa done. And not only that, the way you then help co-navigate, co-partner with mana whenua. So just to see you there, I just really want to make it to you. Because again, I'm only a voice, I haven't done all this work. I've been a tutu navigator fellow, but it's all the people that have come together like here. You know, that's who I want to celebrate. You know, and yeah, I'd be really insulting and in terms of my obligation as Māori, because we have a saying that all this is not done by myself, it requires the effort of all of us. So just again, acknowledge those who wove in this. You know, and so we were able to mirror that co-navigation, co-design. For the first time at that point in 2019-18, you know, like Auckland Council had been almost going 10 years by then. But mana whenua never ever got to sit in a workshop with councillors. Because part of the bureaucratic processes is staff will come and talk to the mana whenua forum, then report back. We said, oh no, that doesn't quite work, because most of the iwi forum members were chairs of the iwi, different reflection of governance. So we said, oh, we need to have a chief-to-chief conversation here. And you know, the role of the Māori Statutory Board that sits on committees, they're all part of the mix. But because of Auckland Council just starting to come to terms with, and I think it still is in some way, of how to navigate, and I think the biggest challenge is recognising that mana authority sits in different places and everyone's holding on to the old representative model before the Auckland Council. Because the beauty is we have the mayor and governing body, we've got 21 local boards, we've got 19 mana whenua iwi authorities that sit in their own governance space, and then we've got these co-management clunky things. But it's getting underneath it and really recognising where does mana and authority sit. It sits here within our communities. It sits within the 21 local boards, 20 councillors, the 19 iwi. Now that's a distributed form of democracy, which we want quickness. We think we just need someone to make a call. But that distributed democracy causes people to have conversation, to get together to work out stuff. But we're hungering for the old, almost Donald Trump model. Let's just make the call, because it's the lack of decision making that's been blamed for some of the dysfunction of Auckland. No, it's not honouring, and that's why our communities get frustrated. Why we have low voter turnout. You know, so again, it's an opportunity to shift our perspective. What's really important, I mentioned, is that it's really anchoring on this concept of wellbeing, not functionalology things of climate change and all these, because it splits us in, and oranga just creates a unifying or holistic view. Because whether it's climate, it's about oranga. Whether it's about transport, it's about oranga. Whether it's about cost of living crisis, it's about oranga. When it's about rough sleeping and homelessness, it's about oranga. We're getting, you know, when you look at how many strategies council creates or any bureaucracy, all we need is really one common thought and focus, then work out how we're going to get there. So those key insights from actually a state of ill-being, the state of Māori and all our negative statistics. In my day job, I'm the district manager out of Pukekohe for Oranga Tāmaki. So if you want to hear about a Crown agency entering into the lives of families, dealing with issues around harm, and at the core of it is ill-being. At the core of it is disconnected, displaced. That manifests in all the negative stuff. So the negative stuff and that data is important because it just helps us understand what is the current state. But 200 years ago, that wasn't the state of whānau. So where we were thriving, we're now into surviving, and the opportunity in response to climate is returning back to thriving, but not just in a human sense, but in a wider living systems, nature, people, nature, and place. The work that we did was mana whenua anchored and led. So we were able to say to council, we'll deal with all the Māori engagement across Auckland, our youth, our Māori communities, our 19 iwi, all our marae. Let's do that, because that had never been done before. And then let's also get together directly with the councillors in charge to then have a direct input on some of the thinking and decision making. And then the Te Tarukia Tāwhiri plan is the outcome of all that. The bit that we never got quite to was creating just a supplementary copy of all the Māori content in Te Tarukia Tāwhiri. So that's what I mean. There's all the, I literally held the pen on the 19U, so we did have a document to feed into the plan. And we asked if we could have a supplementary copy so that communities and that could just pick it up as a whole document to understand the whole thinking and everything in it. We didn't quite get there. But in Te Tarukia Tāwhiri is all the Māori elements, and in it is embedded Te Ora or Tāmaki Makaurau. Because the method was, we needed to consolidate our own understanding as the 19 iwi to then input with the Auckland Council. Because often it's framed as this co-design, co-partnership, mana whenua and Auckland Council. What people don't really understand is the 19 iwi have had to learn how to partner to then weave together, and that's dealing with thousands of years of history that a lot of us don't quite understand why that iwi won't sit with that iwi, and so again, I guess these are the big sheet coding. And then the other thing we were able to introduce is this Indigenous Māori systems thinking, mātauranga Māori, and building a complementary framing like a pair of binoculars where Western knowledge can coalesce with Indigenous knowledge. And like a pair of binoculars, which may be the next 200 years of the journey, is we've got to work out that little knob in the middle to lenses in a shared focus, because it's not about the lenses in themselves, it's the shared view beyond that a pair of binoculars give us. And that's the unfolding future. That's the opportunity of where we co-locate in our shared response to things like climate change or climate. At the moment, we see this in our country, and it's not as simple as bloody left things and right things and coalition. We're too busy caught up in our own individual lenses, looking at each other, whereas all we need to do is reorientate to stand shoulder to shoulder and have a shared view. And it's amazing that even in a conversation, if you were just to stand next to each other and start having a conversation like that, how we start to mirror, then it's about this space, not this space. You know, so that's sort of opportunity. And we've got the next 200 years to do that. And so Te Tarukia Tāwhiri, in terms of our cultural narrative, and that's all in the detail of Te Tarukia Tāwhiri, but basically, again, different worldviews coming together within the Māori-led. So Te Taruki were two things. One, Te Tarukia Tāwhiri, Taruki means the frustrations. Tā means of, Tāwhiri mātia, Tāwhiri mātia, and our, often they're referred to as atua, but atua aren't gods. Atua are like our primary ancestors. So when we talk about Tāwhiri, Tāwhiri is the guardian of climate, atmosphere, winds, and we see the impacts of Tāwhiri because Tāwhiri is an unseen ancestor, but like the wind, you saw the news yesterday, you know, that poor person that got hit by a falling branch. There was a bit of a social media of a person getting blown out into the traffic, and for those who have lived in Wellington, we know what Tāwhiri is like. So this really refers to the struggles and frustrations of Tāwhiri. And what we're experiencing from a Māori perspective in climate change is the frustrations of our primary ancestors, the frustrations of nature, because they're getting poha and poor human behaviour in getting us into this. So again, that's the sort of thinking. But also, Taruki is a crayfish project that's woven together by Sapojang. So the idea of a framework, that's where the thinking. So our Ngāti Whātua people on the forum talked about this Taruki as a framework. Our southern iwi talked about Te Taruki as the framework, and so we're working together. So it's not like finding one truth and one story. It's okay that we arrive with different views. It's just, we just need to zoom out a little bit just to ensure everyone's views are there rather than being caught up on. So again, as I mentioned, it's really about returning for humanity, returning to circular thinking. Because as one point, we're all indigenous. But through different shifts, and you know, we've gone from a real circular way of being to what I call a square way. Linear, extractive, you know, patriarchal, and anything like square systems, it causes you to either pick a side or get forced in the corner. In a circular way of being, there's room for everyone. All we do is widen the circle, take one step out to ensure the voices in the mana can come together. Yeah? So I guess in one of our names out at Pukaki Marae, she talks about recircularization, not a decolonisation thought, because that's all about dealing with power and square. She said, well, because you know what we're seeing is nature revealing itself. Nature sits there. Why do you have to go for a square thing to get straight to nature? You know, so she uses we need to recircularize ourselves in a way in this country how we can do that together, because our kids, their mokos already are. You know, so the opportunity to reimagine, to reframe and reset, and then reorientate. So that let's shift our reorientation to shoulder, look there, and look, and not always just. Unless I love sitting opposite my wife and staring into her eyes. But when we need to do mahi together, we've got to reorientate. Otherwise, I'll get in trouble. And then the regeneration of well-being, the regeneration of those systems, and so again, just thinking about circular systems, and then you know the work that's already been done within thinking about circular economies, the donut economics. There's a whole lot of circular action happening globally and in Aotearoa. You know, so that reorientation is sort of happening. The key themes when the Māori iwi gathered around the forum to sort of anchor what are we going to look at and guide in relation to Te Tarukia Tāwhiri or Te Tarukia Tāwhiri in the process gave us an opportunity of coming together. And we needed something big that impacted on the whole of Auckland in order to lift out of our individual stuff to actually focus on what's important. So the thinking, and you might have heard this term, mana motuhake. I use the term oranga motuhake, but it's about self-determining, self-sufficient well-being. It's not quite the separatist lingo that's happening at the moment. But that's about language. But really using Te Ora or Tāmaki Makaurau as their unifying thought. So it's wellbeing focused, enabling whānau to transform their state of wellbeing from surviving to thriving. That's the opportunity. So solutions already exist within ancestral wisdom. And actually, if we've been able to survive for 200 years, we're resilient people. But there's a lot of work out there needing, or we need to build more resilience in our communities and with Māori. But that's just survival resilience, not thriving resilience. So, and also, it's also about our iwi mana whenua taking responsibility, that we want to be an active partner, not just moan about how people don't recognise our rights. And what that anchors on is around our fulfilling our obligations as kaitiaki. So kaitiakitanga and manaakitanga are two important values, principles of Te Ao Māori, are our obligations. We have an obligation, responsibility to be kaitiaki, to be manaaki, because that's hardwired. But even the space to even acknowledge how we fulfill it is challenging. But so we're there to fulfill obligations and responsibilities. Sometimes it gets miscommunicating as asserting rights and interests, which is a square behaviour, which is a challenge within Māori too. So it's not like, so there's things, if we're going to buy into this within our Māori context, these are things we've got to be able to sit together like this and have those conversations. And then the obligations around manaakitanga. The other opportunity is how do we bring some of that Indigenous Māori systems knowledge, mātauranga Māori, and also in our context, we're also responding to 200 years of impacts. And the term I use, squareisation, is code for any shon, urbanisation, westernisation, colonisation, which has led to a disconnection, displacement from circular being. So that's about our own space as well. Kia ora te tātai. Tātai are our connections. Connections between people, place and nature, like whakapapa. And so we sustain kia ora ngā tātai. So like how I said, we are already connected. We all are children of rangi and papa. That's a tātai. We all have a tātai to nature, and we all have our different traditions and stories that share that. Probably all of us have had an ancestor at some point get on a waka ship or airplane or come here. So again, those are all tātai, those are connections. And so again, we're all interconnected through whakapapa, nature, land and people, and we're all part of a whole living system. Recognising our wider whakapapa relationships across New Zealand, beyond Tāmaki Makaurau, but also especially our whānau relations in the Pacific Moananui Kiwi. And because one of the things we've contextualised, and you may have heard the term of climate refugee, and our whānau in Kiribati and Tuvalu, they're going to be potential climate refugees. So what's our public policy response to that? So it'll be a migration refugee sort of thinking from a Western-centred view. But our iwi view is actually we're preparing for the third migration movement from the Pacific. About 1,000 years ago, our ancestors left the Pacific to arrive on voyaging canoes 1,000 years ago or so. And over 29 generations, we arrived as Pacifica whānau and we become Māori of this. Post-World War II, we saw the second wave. A lot of our whānau came from the Pacific to come to Aotearoa, to go to St. Stephen's School or other schools, to learn, to get jobs, to provide. And now we've got about 5 or 6 generations of Pacifica whānau. And the beauty is, around Greyland Park was one of our first Pacifica villages post-World War II. Freeman's Bay, all that area. So initially they were the working peoples, so all our Irish whānau were there. Then the next wave were Māori, and then the next wave was our Pacifica whānau. Now we've still got whānau, the Ākoi whānau and others that sit in here that are still in their whare. Others have cashed up and gone out south. Now the third wave from the Pacific is what we're labelling as climate refugee. And the conversations that are happening within our Pacifica communities and mana whenua is shifting to say, hey, how do we get together to prepare for the welcome of whānau, because in a wider sense, the Pacific is another whānau area, that whānau are going to move from one part of their home to another part of their home, so how do we prepare to welcome whānau, not treat them as climate refugees. Okay, so this is real, just shifting our view sometimes, and that's where, bringing these different knowledge systems together. So underpinning principles is around our kaitaki whakapapa, the care and of the living system, because mana whenua are the human manifestation of the land. They're just not another human stakeholder that we line up, because in a Ngāti Tata tradition we can have a 1500, 2000 year narrative of our place here. So all that brings is about a 1000-year view of knowing of the area. And we saw that in the Auckland anniversary flooding. So all the places that got flooded all had Māori names to do with water. Yeah. Waiho literally means 100 waters. Yet we built there and put all this development. So we're not tapping into their old knowledge and wisdom of to how, and that's just in the name. And it's not the name in the dictionary. We need to listen to the local narratives. And like the old farming families going back, Eden Park, that was a wetlands. That happened to flood. So water will always find its home. But humans get out of sync, and we just say. And I love engineers, man, because they're solution focused. But if we brought those two knowledges together, how magical that could be. And so the whole debate around the Takapuna golf course is interesting if you're able to locate some different perspectives in it. Manaakitanga is around the care and hori mana and value to all people. And whakamana tiriti is really about, let's get beyond debating it, how do we empower and navigate information. So these are some of the frameworks just to help play with those lenses. So acknowledging the council and the forum, see the Te Tarukia, this is my crude little binocular. So that creates that shared view, acknowledging the kawanatanga stewardship duty of care that council and central government has for all of us as citizens, if you like. The rangatiratanga, kautakitanga, manaki obligations and responsibilities of mana whenua, and together, how do we acknowledge the equity and the taurites like balance of all our people? So this is that sort of constitutional level stuff in terms of treaty, but then we're starting to see this acknowledgement of the role of tangata tiriti with tangata whenua in how, where the real stuff happens on the ground through the mahi that you guys see. So also acknowledging sort of the shared knowledge system. Again, we were able to, through council, bring in that Western science and that importance, alongside the mātauranga, the Māori knowledge, the Māori wisdom of mana whenua, and really together, the shared view was around acknowledging te hao te whenua, te hao te tangata, so the essence of the land and the vitality of the people. And if we can come together like that, then it's about oranga whakapapa, the well-being of our interconnected living system. It's oranga whenua, the well-being of the land. Oranga wai, the well-being of our water systems. Oranga marae, our well-being of our sort of community centres, if you like. And oranga whānau, which is the well-being of our families. So hence the flipping that out, it becomes an oranga view. Te tākia tāwhiri gave us opportunity. And then really on the ground stuff, is tangata tiriti communities together and tangata whenua around our iwi hapu. And the thing that came through the pūnui work, because from a mana whenua view, my iwi is that we have a position, a view that only mana whenua can be kaitaki within Auckland or within our tribal area. What that means is we have fundamental obligations to the whakapapa systems of this area. And when we affirm that, people get, does that mean it excludes people from expressing kaitiakitanga or stewardship or guardianship? And so what came out of the work of pūnui is tiakitanga. And if you look at the charter that was signed by all the parties in terms of the pūnui regeneration project, there's a set of principles there that come from mana whenua, that come from our community, that connect us all. So it's really about how do we together, I stand in a kaitiaki space, you stand in a tiaki space. So it's like kaitiaki tanga stewardship, or it's kaitiaki tanga, because again, sometimes it's when we're trying to translate these different words into English, that's where it gets confusing. So again, if we acknowledge the mana integrity and around language and things, because it's really what sits underneath it. And what's interesting is that term kaitiakitanga only got introduced in a wider New Zealand context through the Waitangi Tribunal claim of the Manukau Harbour. And it was released in July 1985, so it's 40 years this year. And that's where the concept of kaitiakitanga that was first came through. Our iwi, we led the claim on behalf of our iwi of the Manukau. But 40 years later, kaitiakitanga is a beautiful term that's all over, which is awesome. But again, that was sourced out of Auckland. So when we think about Auckland and our role, not only to influence the rest of the country but the world, it's sort of all sitting in. And so that's a bit of background and context to Te Ora, to say you've got a little bit of how we got there. And basically in Tāmaki Makaurau, this is the framework. At the heart is that thinking of oranga. Kia ora, te tata is really acknowledging all our connections that sit between place, people and nature. Those are the key threads of the tata that unify us all, that connect us. So we talked about, and then what sits out there are some areas for action and decision. Tūranga wararai, how do we create that sense of place and sense of belonging? Mana whakahaere is around leadership and decision making. So notice I don't say co-management or any co-governance or any of that, because that's a big distraction. At the heart of it is around leadership and decision making. And what does that look like in our communities, in our different spaces, and then in the shared space, what does leadership and decision making look like? We get too caught up on structures. Which serves me as a bureaucrat, because that's my jam from the scene. But a fancy bureaucrat. Whanaungatanga, how do we strengthen those relationships? Tonga tukuiho, thinking about what are we leaving with a legacy? Because we've inherited stuff, doing, thinking from our ancestors, all of us. So what are we preparing to leave? So we need to be making tupuna ancestral decisions now. Because we're all tupuna. And that's that sort of thinking about what are we going to be handing on through to our children and grandchildren. This is just a deeper sort of framing of each of those elements. The kia ora, te tai, the aho, the threads of nature, place and people. And the key thing that sat out of that within Te Tarukia Tāwhiri was some immediate short-term shifts and some big shifts, big opportunities that the 19 iwi were advocating to the council at the time. Haven't quite seen that come through any plans, but the aspirations still. But they're like real common sense when you understand them. So the two short term was really about how do we recalibrate and realign the current system. And in this case, we're saying Auckland Council, let alone Auckland as a system. So we talked about existing activities and programs are reviewed and recalibrated to align to Te Tarukia Tāwhiri. So all the different plans and budgets within council, CCOs, how do they align? What is each of their contributions to Te Tarukia? So it's a bit fragmented. So the issues around existing systems, strategies, plans and programs are not climate resilient, even though there's a whole lot of climate stuff happening. But, drive systemic change, so we saw that as preparation and education. So how do we educate, prepare whānau, Māori communities, Māori landowners, marae, Māori sector organisations and businesses, and iwi for system shift. Because there's a bit of a lag in resistance sitting within a lot of our Māori Pacifica communities, because it's a Western government, local government narrative, basically saying, oh, because of climate change, you now will have to change. Now, to be honest, in the last 200 years, we've already had those narratives. You know, the arrival of missionaries to say, hey, it's through God, it's all those things that are going to be your pathway to well-being. And then government people came, so we've had all this rhetoric. And there was a beautiful saying that came through one of our hui, it's like old wine in new bottle. Sometimes you're just changing the label on the bottle, but it's still the same. And so it's just getting underneath that. But what we recognise is actually, are our communities, are our people really prepared and educated for, and one of the things is all this language around adaptation and emissions, it actually leads to omission, because it dislocates people in the narrative, because all this science language, all this other language, it's a language of power, not mana. Hey, so because like everyday whānau is like, well, okay, how are we sorting out my recycling net and contribute? How, like, there's all this stuff we've got to do, but it's not linked back to our why and our understanding. And whānau, let alone, all our technicians who love this stuff. Hey. And I'm a real geeky, nerdy fella, I love this stuff. But I recognise that I can't speak geeky people unless I'm in a geeky hood. I've got to change my language depending on who we're talking. And that's what I was taught by my elders in translating and navigating. Change your language, and you've got to locate in the eyes and the ears and the hearts of who's receiving, not I've got a message to say. So again, that reorientation. So then we move into the bigger shifts. So again, this kaitakitanga stewardship, this binocular, this tākitanga kaitaki, how do we land that together? Because that's where, and I guess the language I'm using, and we've seen it in other examples across the country, and they call it the legal personhood of nature. So we've got the Uruwera Rangers on Te Ora. So we stepped away from the Crown negotiation around the treaty settlement, because they were saying, we'll offer you joint management of the Uruwera National Park. Now iwi was saying, well, actually that's not a national park to us, that's our ancestor. So how dare we joint manage our ancestor? It's like my mum's 85 on Friday. We're having a conversation with her and my whānau, like, what's our shared care arrangement of our mum? And how do we honour her and whakamana her and not treat her as a thing that we've got to manage? So that's a thing, like a shifting the narrative and understanding. So we can relate to a shared care, but this co-management, co-governance, Johnny, what the hell is that? And, so we saw that in the Uruwera. The Whanganui River has now got that status. Taranaki Maunga. Our little iwi are talking about that in relation to the manako, because it's a tupuna, not just a taonga. You can manage a taonga, but you can't a tupuna. So what came out of the tūhoi was shared care arrangement. And now that's a different language and then it's about, well, who are the voices that need to be involved in the shared care? The hunters, the dog, all those. So again, just shifting that lens a bit around this idea, and especially around the regeneration of our ecological systems. One of the priorities that come out of that, there's one thing we could do in Auckland is regenerate wetlands. 99% of our wetlands are lost in Auckland. Now, they become your soak points, deal with water. I think Flash from out of China, they call it soak cities. So we keep on buying these sponge cities. So we keep on getting these other things when we've already got the answers sitting here. That's a great nod, to like, okay, but then how do we again reframe it to make it our own, because it's coming from the land, it's coming from water. So those are those. There's one thing. Also, that shift carbon dependent, that's really important in what you mentioned earlier around transport. I'm a cyclist, but I've got to do triathlons as part of my cycling. But so it's about, and when you're on the road, on the bike, man, just the way you connect to the place, and you get to see more because you haven't go slow, and so shifting our way, and the outcome is decarbonisation, but there's so many other benefits of getting on a bike or whatever. An interesting thing is, getting all these, electric cars and hydrogen cars, the hard-faced thing, it's still the same people through those motor companies, and all they're doing is finding different ways to reinvent the engine and then package it around it in private context, as opposed to maybe we need a public transport solution and get out of cars, which will then decarbonise. And the irony, and this is where looking back into whakapapa, my understanding when we looked into some of the history of New York, you know, the thing that really drove the shift into cars was horse manure. Because of horses, carts, and the sanitation or lack of sanitation in the cities. So there was a quick adoption into cars because it would eliminate all the poo. So just imagine if we had a horse crap sort of think about, you know, because, you know, someone created the wheel as a solution to something.
Yeah.
What we're doing is just reimagining the same thing by using a different energy input, but still about you getting in the car. You know, so again, that reorientation of the view again, you know. And then the other key thing is around this drive to move to a circular economy, and our thinking is underpinned by that concept of kaitiaki tanga and tika. So if we had kaitiaki tanga or taki tanga at the heart of your economy, we wouldn't have a cost of living, we wouldn't have these imbalances, because it comes from a deep obligation and responsibility to others, and seeing in the presentation of the updates, you know, that collective action, that's what that's about, you know, seeing that. Tāmaki Ora is Auckland Council's response to Te Ora o Tāmaki. So again, you can access that through their website. This is the up-to-date. So this is why we've anchored and seeded with Council Te Ora o Tāmaki Makaurau. It's not just Council's responsibility to contribute to the wellbeing, it's all of our view, including the iwi. But this is a clear articulation of how Council's taken it and then action in it within itself. So it's framed as Māori outcomes, there's different ora anchor points or po, so, and then they've got a measurement framework. So that's just a lens of Auckland Council's contribution to Te Ora o Manukau. The original iteration a couple of years ago was called Kia Ora Tāmaki. They've done a little bit of recalibration, but the fundamental elements, and when you read this document, one of the first things it talks about is ngā tata, kia ora, ngā tata, the well-being of those connections. So there's enough of that DNA code, that Māori Da Vinci code, from the work around Te Taraki Tāwhiri, that's it. And I guess one of the opportunities or suggestions as a takeaway, whether in your individual groups or together as a collective, is what could be your contribution to Kia Ora Tāmaki in this way? And being able to, on the ground, start to connect into, and I know a lot of you already are, it's those local connections to the place, the local iwi, all those sort of things. So again, it's taken it from the sky and the way we live into it in the land, in the place. So. And then the other key thing was the work of our rangatahi, our youth that were working, you know. So this sits in Te Taraki Tāwhiri. They came up with this beautiful whakatauki, ka noho teina ki te tangata, ka noho tuakana ki te taio. So what it's saying is, in the relationship between nature and humanity, nature is the taina, humanity is the taina. Humanity is the younger sibling. Nature is our older sibling, like you know, our older brothers and sisters. But it's not about this power dynamic of older and younger. It's what the young ones can help teach the older ones, and what the older ones pass on the wisdom. So it's this relationship. And so in this context, our young people, with the guidance of Riata Makiha, so Deidre Herman, I think, one of our kaumātua. So he's like a young 80-year-old. They just get so invigorated in working with our young ones. So there's that intergenerational transfer of wisdom and knowledge, and the young ones are just living into it. So again, it's about acknowledging the voices right through, because our young ones are the tupuna of tomorrow. We're the tupuna of today. So we've got to think in that way. And tēnā koutou katoa.
Community Climate Action Network, Tāmaki